My father screamed that I was a worthless failure as he threw my bags onto the rain-soaked pavement. He told me to rot in the streets, unaware that I earned $15 million a year. I wiped the rain from my face, smiled, and initiated the foreclosure process. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The sound of my laptop lid being slammed shut wasn't just loud. It was a thunderclap that signaled the end of my life as I knew it. My fingers, which had been flying across the keys just seconds before, coding the final patch for a server update that would net me more money in an hour than my father made in a decade, were now trembling in my lap. I looked up, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Patrick stood over me, his chest heaving, his face a mottled map of rage and disdain. The veins in his neck were bulging so prominently I thought they might actually burst. Beside him, my mother, Linda, stood with her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her lips pursed in that familiar, disappointed line that had defined my entire childhood. "I have had enough, Lucy," Patrick roared, his voice shaking the framed photos on the walls, photos of my brother, Mark, accepting awards, graduating, smiling perfectly. There were no photos of me. "I have had enough of coming home after a 12-hour shift at the plant to find you sitting in that same damn spot, wearing those same damn pajamas, playing your little computer games." "Dad, I'm working," I tried to say, my voice small, barely a whisper. I was 26 years old, a grown woman, yet in this house, under his glare, I felt 6 again. "I'm managing the..." "Working," he laughed, a harsh, barking sound that lacked any humor. He leaned down, his face inches from mine. I could smell the stale coffee and industrial grease on him. "Work is sweat, Lucy. Work is aching back and calloused hands. Work is contributing to society, not rotting your brain on the internet while your mother and I break our backs to keep a roof over your head." "Patrick, calm down," Linda said, though her tone suggested she agreed with him entirely. She looked at me with cold, tired eyes. "Lucy, you have to understand how this looks. Mark just got promoted to regional manager. He's out there building a future. And you're just here." "I pay for the internet," I said, my voice gaining a fraction of strength. "I bought the groceries this week. "You bought cereal?" Patrick exploded, grabbing my laptop from the table. For a second, I thought he was going to smash it. That laptop contained the encryption keys to an empire he couldn't even comprehend. He shoved it into my chest hard enough to bruise. "You think buying a box of cereal makes you an adult? You are a parasite, Lucy. A leech. You are 26 years old and you are a useless failure." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Useless failure. He had said it. He had finally said the quiet part out loud. "I want you out," he hissed, pointing a trembling finger toward the front door. "Tonight, now, I am done supporting a deadbeat. Go live in the streets and see how far your games get you then." I looked at Linda, pleading silently for her to intervene, to be a mother. She just looked away, picking at a loose thread on the sofa. "Your father is right, Lucy. Maybe hitting rock bottom is what you need to finally grow up." I stood up slowly, clutching my laptop to my chest like a shield. The betrayal wasn't in the eviction, it was in the dismissal of my entire existence. They didn't see me. They never had. I looked at the man who raised me, the man who was currently looking at me with pure hatred, and I felt something inside me snap. It wasn't my heart, it was my tether to them. "Fine," I said, my voice steady for the first time. "I'll go." "Don't expect a penny from us," Patrick spat as I walked toward the stairs. "You figure it out on your own." I didn't look back. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself, the diagnosis being that I was an orphan with living parents. My room was exactly as it had been when I was a teenager, a shrine to a girl they didn't know. I pulled my 2 suitcases from the top of the closet, the dust making me sneeze. I didn't rush. Patrick was likely downstairs pacing, expecting me to come down crying, begging for another chance, promising to get a real job at the grocery store or the reception desk at the dental clinic. I folded my hoodies. I packed my tech equipment with surgical precision. My portable server drives, my high-speed modems, the hardware wallets that held my cryptocurrency portfolio. Each item was worth more than the car sitting in the driveway downstairs, a car I had bought for them under the guise of Mark winning a raffle because I knew they wouldn't accept it from me. My hands shook as I zipped the first bag. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by a cold, hollow ache in my stomach. It is a specific kind of pain to realize that your parents' love is conditional, and the condition is mediocrity. They loved Mark because they understood him. He struggled, he complained about his boss, he had debt. He was relatable. I was an enigma, and therefore I was a threat. I could hear them talking downstairs. The floorboards were thin. "She'll be back in an hour," Patrick's voice drifted up, muffled but distinct. "She has nowhere to go, she has no money. When she comes crawling back, we set ground rules. No internet. She applies to the factory on Monday." "It's for her own good," Linda replied. "We've been too soft. Mark said he could maybe get her an interview for the janitorial staff at his office. She needs to learn humility." I paused, holding a photo of the four of us from a vacation 10 years ago. We looked happy. It was a lie. I dropped the photo into the trash can. I dragged my suitcases to the landing. The wheels bumped loudly against the steps, a heavy, rhythmic thudding that announced my departure. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, they were waiting in the kitchen. Patrick was drinking a beer, looking smug. Linda was washing dishes, her back to me. "Leaving already?" Patrick sneered. "Don't forget your coat. It's pouring out there, though I suppose a little cold water might wake you up to reality." "I won't be coming back, Dad," I said, putting my hand on the doorknob. "Oh, you'll be back," he laughed, taking a long swig of his beer. "You won't last a night. You don't know how the world works, Lucy. You're soft." I opened the door. The rain was coming down in sheets, a gray curtain separating the warmth of the house from the cold unknown. But the house wasn't warm. It was freezing. "Goodbye, Patrick. Goodbye, Linda," I said. I couldn't bring myself to call them Mom and Dad anymore. I stepped out onto the porch and pulled my bags after me. The door slammed shut behind me almost instantly, the lock clicking with a finality that echoed in the wet night air. I stood there for a moment, letting the rain soak into my hoodie. I wasn't crying. I was calculating. I pulled out my phone, the latest model, which I usually kept hidden in my pocket, and opened an app they didn't even know existed. I tapped a contact labeled Concierge. "Miss Lucy," the voice on the other end was smooth, professional, and respectful. "How can we assist you this evening?" "I need a suite," I said, walking down the driveway, the rain mixing with the silent tears I refused to acknowledge. "The presidential, and send a car. I'm at the parents' address." "Immediately, ma'am. We'll have the Bentley there in 10 minutes. Champagne on ice." "Whiskey," I corrected. "Neat." As I stood on the curb, watching the lights of my childhood home flicker, a thought crossed my mind. It was a cold, sharp thought, sharper than the wind biting at my cheeks. They thought they had taught me a lesson about the real world. They thought they had humbled me. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. I didn't just play the game. I built the system they lived in. To understand why this hurt so much, you have to understand the last 3 years. I hadn't moved back home because I was broke. I moved back home because I was lonely. 3 years ago, I launched Etheria, a sandbox open-world game that started as a passion project in my dorm room and ended up being the highest-grossing digital platform in the hemisphere. I didn't want the fame. I saw what happened to young tech CEOs, the scrutiny, the lawsuits, the danger. So I stayed anonymous. "The architect," the world called me. I made $15 million last year, after taxes. But money is an insulator. It cuts you off from people. I couldn't relate to my friends struggling with student loans anymore. I couldn't date without wondering if they just wanted a payout. So, when my custom-built, smart home estate was entering its final architectural phase, a project that was taking 2 years due to the complex underground server cooling systems I was installing, I decided to stay with my parents. I wanted to reconnect. I wanted to be their daughter again. I paid off their car loans anonymously. I slipped cash into Linda's purse and let her believe she'd found it. I filled the fridge. But all they saw was a girl in a hoodie staring at a screen. The contrast with Mark was the hardest pill to swallow. Mark, my older brother, was the golden child. He was 30, wore cheap suits that fit poorly, and worked as a middle manager at a logistics firm. He drove a leased BMW he couldn't afford and constantly talked about hustle culture. Just last week, we had a family dinner. Mark had arrived late, loudly talking on his Bluetooth earpiece about synergy and quarterly targets. "Sorry I'm late," he'd announced, throwing his K. Eyes on the table. The grind never stops. Big things coming, big things. Patrick had beamed at him, literally glowing with pride. "That's my boy, a real go-getter, not like some people," he'd added, shooting a glare at me across the pot roast. "So Mark," Linda had chirped, spooning potatoes onto his plate, "tell us about work." "Just got a raise," Mark said, puffing out his chest. 3%, they know my value." 3%, Patrick roared, slamming his hand on the table. "That is incredible. See, Lucy, that is what happens when you apply yourself. Mark is going places." I had sat there, silently chewing my food. I had made $40,000 in passive royalty income during the time it took Mark to eat a dinner roll. But I said nothing. I didn't want to overshadow him. I wanted them to love me for me, not for my bank account. But the antagonist in my life wasn't just my father's ignorance or my mother's enabling. It was Mark himself. He knew. Or at least, he suspected. 2 days before the eviction, Mark had come into my room without knocking. He looked different, sweaty, pale, his eyes darting around the room. He spotted my setup, the quadruple monitors, the server rack humming in the closet I kept locked. "Nice gear," he'd said, his voice tight. "Must cost a fortune. Where'd you get the money, Lucy? Steal it." "I save," I said, minimizing my windows. "I need $5,000, he blurted out. "Gambling debt, some bad people, Lucy. Mom and Dad can't know, you have to help me." "I don't have $5,000, Mark," I lied. I wasn't going to enable his habit. I had already paid off 2 of his credit cards secretly, and he had just run them up again. His face had twisted into a sneer, a mask of ugliness that mirrored Patrick's. "You're lying. I see the packages that come here. High-end tech. You're hiding money. If you don't give it to me, I'll make sure Dad knows you're holding out on them. I'll tell him you're doing something illegal, selling drugs online or something." "Get out, Mark," I had said calmly. "You'll regret this," he had whispered. "I'm the favorite, remember that. If it's your word against mine, you lose every time." Now, sitting in the back of the Bentley as it glided through the rain toward the city skyline, I realized Mark had made good on his threat. He must have poisoned Patrick's ear, told him some lie to accelerate my eviction. He wanted me gone so he could squeeze them for money without my silent judgment witnessing it. Mark was desperate, Patrick was abusive, Linda was complicit. They thought they had discarded a piece of trash. They had no idea they had just declared war on a nuclear power. The presidential suite at the Four Seasons was a stark, marble and gold contrast to the peeling beige wallpaper of my parents' hallway. The doorman had brought my bags up on a brass cart, his eyes not even flickering at the sight of my worn-out sneakers and damp hoodie. That was the beauty of the five-star world. They didn't care who you were, as long as the credit card cleared. And my black card, the one made of anodized titanium that I usually kept buried in the lining of my backpack, had cleared with a satisfying ping. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the city. From up here, the cars looked like toys, the people like ants. It gave me a sense of perspective I desperately needed. Below, in the rain, was the world Patrick and Linda thought they understood. Up here, in the quiet, climate-controlled air, was the reality I had built. I didn't sleep. Instead, I transformed the dining table into a command center. I unpacked my portable server nodes, the glowing blue lights reflecting off the mahogany surface. I set up my 3 monitors, creating a digital fortress. I ordered room service, a Wagyu burger and truffle fries, not because I was hungry, but because I could. Because 3 hours ago, I was being told I wasn't worth the price of a box of cereal. It was time to assess the battlefield. I opened a secure channel to my lawyer, Mr. Henderson. It was late, but he answered on the second ring. Lucy, his voice was gravelly and warm. I saw the notification on the card. A hotel stay in your own city. Is everything all right? I've been evicted, I said, my voice flat. The timeline for the estate needs to be accelerated. I can't stay here for 3 months. I'm sorry to hear that, Henderson said, the professional veneer slipping just enough to show genuine concern. I can have the contractors move to 24-hour shifts, but it will cost triple. Do it, I said, but that's not why I'm calling. I need you to pull the file on the Maple Street property. There was a pause, the sound of typing, and then a sigh. Your parents' house, the one you anonymously purchased the mortgage note for last October. That's the one, I said, staring at the cursor blinking on my screen. You want to foreclose? He asked. No, I said, leaning back in the plush. Velvet chair? Not yet, that's the nuclear option. I want to know about the other liens. When I bought the debt, there was a second position holder, a personal loan. Let me check. Yes, a high-interest consolidation loan taken out 18 months ago. Co-signed by your father, but the primary beneficiary listed on the disbursement is a Mark D. Reynolds. My stomach tightened. Mark, I whispered, he used the house as collateral. It appears so, and Lucy, the payments are 60 days behind. The lender is preparing a notice of default. If they default on the second mortgage, it triggers a clause in the primary mortgage, the one you hold. You could legally take the house tomorrow. Hold off, I commanded. I need to know where that money went. Mark claims he's a regional manager making 6 figures. Why does he need a $100,000 loan against his parents' retirement home? I hung up and cracked my knuckles. It was time to do what I did best. I wasn't just a game developer. Etheria was built on a proprietary economy engine that required military-grade security. I knew how to follow digital footprints better than I knew how to navigate a dinner party. I started with public records, then moved to social engineering. I found Mark's work email. It had been deactivated. I ran a search on the company's internal directory, a simple script to ping active users. User M. Reynolds not found. I dug deeper. I accessed the cached version of his company's newsletter. There was a blurb from 4 months ago, farewell to Mark Reynolds. He hadn't been promoted, he had been fired. I sat there, the light from the screens illuminating my face, the burger getting cold beside me. He had been lying for months. The suits, the late nights at the office, the business trips, it was all a facade. He was unemployed, drowning in debt, and bleeding our parents dry to keep up the appearance of success. And when the walls started closing in, when he needed a scapegoat to distract them from the missing money, he targeted me. I wasn't just a sister he was jealous of. I was a distraction. As long as Patrick was screaming at me for being lazy, he wasn't looking at the bank statements Mark was likely intercepting from the mailbox. I had the leverage, I owned their debt, I knew his secret. I took a sip of the sparkling water the hotel had provided. Okay, Mark, I said to the empty room. You wanted to play a game? Let's play. 2 days later, the opportunity presented itself. I hadn't contacted them. I hadn't begged to come back. I had simply vanished into the luxury of the 4 seasons. But I knew the pattern. The first of the month was approaching. That was when Patrick sat down at the kitchen table with his checkbook and his reading glasses, groaning about the cost of heating oil. I decided to make a visit. I needed to pick up the rest of my junk, mostly old clothes I didn't care about, but it was the perfect pretext. I didn't take the Bentley. I called a rideshare, a nondescript sedan that wouldn't raise eyebrows. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked smaller than I remembered. It looked tired. The gutters were full of leaves, a chore Mark had promised to do 3 weeks ago. I walked up the steps, my heart beating a steady, angry rhythm. I used my key. They hadn't changed the locks yet. That cost money they didn't have. I walked into the kitchen. The scene was almost identical to the night I left, except the tension was different. It was thicker, quieter. Patrick was at the table, his head in his hands. Linda was standing by the stove, stirring soup, looking anxious. Mark was there, too, leaning against the counter, eating an apple with a casual arrogance that made my blood boil. They froze when I walked in. "You," Patrick grunted, lifting his head. His eyes were bloodshot. "I thought I told you to stay away until you had a job." "I'm just here for the rest of my things," I said calmly, moving towards the hallway. "And to give you this." I pulled a folded piece of paper from my pocket and placed it on the table in front of Patrick. It was a printout of the company newsletter I had found. "What is this?" Patrick asked, squinting at the paper. "It's a farewell announcement," I said, leaning against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "From Mark's company, dated 4 months ago." The room went dead silent. The only sound was the bubbling of the soup. Mark dropped the apple. It hit the floor with a dull thud and rolled under the table. His face went from arrogant to ash gray in a nanosecond. "What are you talking about?" Linda asked, her voice trembling. "Mark just got a promotion. He's a regional manager." "Read it, Dad," I said. Patrick picked up the paper, his hands shaking. He read it once, then twice. He looked up at Mark, confusion warring with denial in his eyes. "Mark, it says you left the company in July. Is this true?" Mark laughed, but it was a high-pitched knee. Arvu's sound. "Dad, come on, you're going to listen to her. She probably photoshopped that. She sits on her computer all day, she can fake anything. It's a mistake, a clerical error." "It's on their public website," I countered, my voice cool and steady. "And I called HR this morning to confirm employment for a reference check. They said you were terminated for cause, something about expense account irregularities." Mark's face twisted. He stepped toward me, his fists clenched. "You lying little, you're just jealous. You're trying to sabotage me because Dad kicked you out." "Is it true, Mark?" Patrick stood up, his voice booming. "Did you lose your job?" "No," Mark shouted, pointing a finger at me. "I'm on a sabbatical, a consulting arrangement. They had to process it as a termination for tax reasons, Dad. You don't understand corporate finance. It's complicated." He turned to Linda, his eyes wide and pleading. "Mom, tell him, I go to work every day, I wear the suit. Would I wear the suit if I was fired?" Linda looked at me, then at Mark. The desperate need to believe in her golden child won out. She turned off the stove and wiped her hands on her apron. "Lucy, why are you doing this? Why are you trying to hurt your brother? He works so hard." "He leaves the house every morning to go sit in a coffee shop, Mom," I said, stepping further into the room. "He doesn't have a job, and that means he doesn't have an income." "Enough," Patrick slammed his hand on the table, crumpling the paper. "I don't know what game you're playing, Lucy, but I won't have it. Mark explains it perfectly. Tax reasons. Consulting. You wouldn't understand, you've never had a real job in your life." "He's lying to you," I said, my voice hardening. "And that's not the only lie. Ask him about the loan, Dad." Mark's eyes bulged. "Get out," he screamed. "Dad, make her leave, she's crazy." "You heard him," Patrick spat at me. "Get your trash and get out, and don't come back with your lies." I looked at them. They were terrified, not of me, but of the truth. They preferred the beautiful lie that their son was successful to the ugly reality that they were being swindled. "Fine," I said, "I'll go, but when the bank calls, don't say I didn't warn you." I turned and walked out. The confrontation hadn't broken the spell, it had only made them hold onto it tighter, but I had rattled Mark. I saw the terror in his eyes. He knew the walls were crumbling. And now, he was going to make a mistake. The mistake happened 24 hours later. I was back in the suite, monitoring the alerts I had set up on my parents' credit profiles. Because I owned the mortgage, I had a permissible purpose to monitor the asset's security, which gave me a backdoor view into the household's financial health. An alert pinged on my center monitor. "New credit inquiry, payday lenders are us." Mark was panicking. My visit had spooked him. He knew I knew about the job, and he likely assumed I knew about the money. He was trying to plug the holes before Patrick found out, but he was digging the hole deeper. I spent the next 6 hours doing a full forensic audit of my parents' finances. It was worse than I thought. It wasn't just the second mortgage. Mark had gained access to Patrick's retirement account. I pulled the transaction logs. Small withdrawals at first, 500 here, 200 there. Then, 3 months ago, a lump sum transfer of $20,000. The description read medical expenses, but I traced the routing number. It went to an online sports betting platform based in Malta. He had gambled away their nest egg. I felt a cold rage settle in my chest. My parents were awful to me, yes. They were cruel and short-sighted, but they were old. Patrick had worked in a chemical plant for 40 years. That money was his life's blood, stored in numbers, and Mark had flushed it down a digital toilet. I printed everything. The betting logs, the bank transfers, the termination letter, the foreclosure notice for the second mortgage that Mark had been hiding from the mail. I created a dossier 3 inches thick. I bound it in a clear plastic cover. It looked like a death warrant. My phone rang. It was Linda. "Lucy," her voice was small, shaky. "Hello, Linda," I answered. "Your father, he's in the hospital." The world stopped for a second. What happened? "Chest pains, stress, they're running tests. It's not a heart attack, they don't think, but his blood pressure is through the roof." She paused, and I could hear her crying. "Mark is here. He's arguing with the doctors about the insurance. He says there's a problem with the copay." Of course there was a problem. Mark had probably stopped paying the premiums, too. "I'm coming," I said. "Lucy, please don't cause a scene," she begged. "Mark is very upset. He's trying to handle everything." "I'm sure he is," I said grimly. I didn't take a rideshare this time. I called the concierge, "Bring the Bentley around, and I need a driver." I arrived at the hospital 20 minutes later. I walked into the waiting room wearing a tailored blazer I had bought that morning and dark jeans. I looked like money. I carried the dossier under my arm. Mark was at the reception desk, his face red, yelling at a nurse. "I told you the card is valid, just run it again." "Sir, it's been declined 3 times," the nurse said, looking exhausted. "Mark," I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the waiting room. He spun around, he looked ragged, his eyes were wild. This is your fault, you stressed him out with your lies." I ignored him and walked past him to the nurse. I pulled out my black card. "Put it on this. Private room. Best cardiac specialist you have on call." The nurse looked at the card, then at me. Her demeanor changed instantly. "Of course, ma'am, right away." "No," Mark lunged forward. "We don't need her charity, she's—" "Shut up, Mark," I said, not even looking at him. I turned to Linda, who was sitting in a plastic chair, looking shrunken and gray. "Mom," I said, sitting beside her, "we need to talk now." "Not here," Mark hissed, hovering over us. "Dad needs us to be united." "Dad needs to know why his insurance lapsed," I said, looking Mark dead in the eye. "It didn't lapse, it's a glitch," Mark yelled. People were staring. "It didn't lapse," I corrected, opening the dossier on my lap. "You stopped paying it 3 months ago, just like you stopped paying the mortgage, just like you drained the retirement fund." Linda's eyes widened as she looked at the papers I was spreading out on the uncomfortable chairs. "Retirement fund? What? What are you talking about?" "Look," I said, pointing to the transaction logs. "Here is the withdrawal, here is where it went. BetKing Online. Mark didn't invest it, he gambled it." Linda picked up the paper, her hands trembling so violently the paper rattled. She looked at the numbers. She looked at Mark. "Mark," she whispered, "tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't take Daddy's retirement." Mark's face crumbled. For a second, I thought he would confess. I thought he would fall to his knees and beg for forgiveness. Instead, he sneered, a vicious, cornered animal look. "You're too stupid to understand," he hissed at Linda. "I was investing it, I had a system, I was going to double it, I was doing it for us. I was going to buy us a mansion. You lost it, I said, all of it. I can win it back, Mark shouted, his voice echoing off the sterile walls. I just need a little more time, and you, he turned on me, poking a finger into my chest. You think you're so smart with your fake papers? Dad won't believe you. He knows I'm the only one who cares about this family. Linda stood up. She looked at the paper, then at Mark. She was wavering. The indoctrination ran deep. Mark, did you really? Was it really for an investment? Yes, Mark seized the lifeline. It was a high-risk venture capital play. It had a bad quarter, but it's coming back. Mom, don't let her poison you against me. She's jealous. She wants to ruin us. Linda looked at me, tears streaming down her face. Lucy, maybe we should discuss this when your father is better. Mark says he can fix it. I stared at her in disbelief. Even with the proof in her hands, she couldn't let go of the fantasy. She was willing to let him destroy whatever was left of their lives rather than admit her golden child was a thief. He can't fix it, Mom, I said, standing up and closing the dossier. Because the house is being foreclosed on Tuesday. What? Linda gasped. And, I added, looking at Mark, I'm the one initiating it. Mark went white. You own the bank. No, I smiled, a cold, sharp smile. I own the debt. I bought your mortgage 6 months ago to save you from yourself, but I'm done saving you. You can't, Mark screamed. That's our house. It was, I said. Now it's my asset, and I'm calling the note. I walked away toward the elevators to check on Patrick, leaving them in the waiting room. Mark was shouting incoherent threats, and Linda was sobbing. The private confrontation hadn't worked. They were still clinging to the wreckage. It was time for the public execution. 1 week later, the welcome home party for my father was in full swing. Mark had organized it. He had sent out invites to every aunt, uncle, and cousin in a 50-mile radius, claiming it was a celebration of Patrick's recovery. But I knew the real reason. I had seen the GoFundMe link he had attached to the digital invitation. Help the family get back on its feet. He was using Dad's heart scare to grift the extended family. I parked the Bentley down the street. It was a clear, crisp afternoon. The front lawn of my parents' house, my house, was filled with cars. I could hear laughter and the clinking of bottles. I checked my phone. Y lawyer Henderson was on standby. The local sheriff's deputy, whom Henderson had contacted regarding the elder abuse and fraud charges we were filing, was 5 minutes out. I walked up the driveway. I wore a simple white dress and heels. I held nothing in my hands but my phone. The conversation died as I stepped onto the patio. My Aunt Sarah gasped. My cousin Mike lowered his beer. Patrick was sitting in his favorite armchair, which had been dragged outside, looking pale but happy, surrounded by well-wishers. Linda was hovering near him, looking anxious. And there was Mark. He was standing on a cooler, holding a red Solo cup, midway through a speech. And that's why, Mark was saying, his voice thick with fake emotion, we appreciate every donation. Dad's medication is expensive. The insurance company screwed us, but we're a family. We stick together. He froze when he saw me. You, he snarled, stepping down from the cooler. You have some nerve showing up here. After you tried to stress Dad out in the hospital, get out, Lucy. No one wants you here. Patrick looked at me, his face hardening. Lucy, I thought I made myself clear. We don't need your toxicity today. I'm not here to be toxic, Dad, I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent yard. I'm here to stop a crime. The only crime is you abandoning your family, Mark shouted, trying to rally the crowd. She walked out on us. She refuses to help pay for Dad's pills. I paid for the surgery, Mark, I said calmly, and the private room, and the specialist. Liar, Mark screamed. I paid for that with my savings. I tapped my phone. I had connected via Bluetooth to the massive portable speaker Mark was using for music. The music cut out. A recording began to play. It was a voicemail Mark had left his bookie 2 nights ago, a recording my private investigator had obtained. "Listen, Tony, I need more time. My old man is back home. I'm running a fundraiser thing on Sunday. I'll have the 5 grand by Monday morning, I swear. Just don't break my legs, man. I'll get the cash from these idiots." The voice echoed through the backyard. "I'll get the cash from these idiots." Mark turned white. The silence in the yard was absolute. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. What is that?" Patrick whispered, gripping the arms of his chair. "That," I said, stepping forward, "is your son, the regional manager." I pulled a folded document from my purse, the only physical evidence I had brought, and handed it to Uncle Jim, who was standing closest to me. "Pass that to my father, please." It was the bank statement showing the $20,000 transfer to Bet King, followed by the foreclosure notice on the second mortgage Mark had taken out. Mark lunged for the paper. "Don't touch that, it's fake. She's hacking the speakers. She's using AI." But Uncle Jim, a burly construction worker, shoved Mark back with one hand. "Sit down, boy. Let your father read." Patrick took the papers. His hands shook as he adjusted his glasses. He read in silence. Linda read over his shoulder, her hand flying to her mouth. "You took the house." Patrick's voice was barely audible. He looked up, his eyes wet. "Mark, you put a second mortgage on the house." "Dad, I had to," Mark stammered, sweating profusely. "I was going to pay it back. It was a sure thing, the market just turned." "And the retirement money?" Patrick asked, his voice rising, cracking with betrayal. 40 years of shift work, gone." I. Mark looked around for an ally, but the family was looking at him with disgust. He turned on me, his face twisting into a mask of pure hate. "This is your fault. If you had just given me the money when I asked, I wouldn't have had to take theirs. You selfish witch. You have millions and you let me drown." "Millions?" Linda asked, looking at me. "What is he talking about?" "She's rich," Mark screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She's the architect. She made that stupid video game. She has $15 million in the bank and she let us think she was broke. She watched us struggle." Patrick looked at me stunned. "Lucy, is this true?" "It is," I said quietly. "I made my fortune 3 years ago. I moved back home to be with you, to help you. I paid off your car. I bought your groceries. I tried to give you money, but you wouldn't take it from me. You only wanted to give it to him." I pointed at Mark, and he stole it all. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder. "Mark Reynolds." The deputy walked into the backyard, flanked by 2 officers. "We have a warrant for your arrest. Fraud, elder abuse, and identity theft." Mark tried to run. He actually tried to scramble over the back fence. But Uncle Jim and Cousin Mike grabbed him by the belt and dragged him back. As they handcuffed him, Mark was screaming, crying, blaming everyone but himself. Patrick didn't look at him. He just stared at the foreclosure notice in his lap, tears row. Ling down his weathered cheeks. The party ended abruptly. The relatives left, muttering apologies and offering support. Mark was in the back of a squad car, heading to the county jail. I sat on the patio steps, watching the sun begin to set. The silence was heavy, but it wasn't the suffocating silence of before. It was the silence of a storm that had finally broken. Patrick and Linda sat in their chairs. They looked 10 years older than they had that morning. "So," Patrick said, his voice rough, "you own the house." "I bought the mortgage note 6 months ago," I confirmed. "I saw the default notices coming. I wanted to protect you." "And you're a millionaire?" Linda asked, looking at me as if I were a stranger. "Yes," I said. "I write software, Mom. It's very successful." Patrick put his face in his hands. "I threw you out," he wept. "I told you to live in the streets. I called you a failure, and the whole time, you were the only one holding this roof up." He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw humility in his eyes. "I am so sorry, Lucy. I was a fool. I was a blind, stubborn old fool. I was so proud of him. I couldn't see what was right in front of me." I walked over and knelt beside his chair. "I know, Dad. He knew how to play the part. I didn't." "Can you ever forgive us?" Linda asked, reaching out to touch my hair, her hand trembling. I can, I said, and I meant it. But things have to change. No more enabling. Mark faces the consequences. You don't bail him out. You don't pay his lawyers. You let him learn. We will, Patrick vowed. I'm done. He's on his own. And as for the house, I said, standing up and brushing off my dress, I'm ripping up the foreclosure. It's yours, mortgage-free. Consider it a retirement gift. Patrick started to protest, but I held up a hand. Accept it, please. It's the only way I can sleep at night. I didn't move back in. I moved into my estate 3 weeks later. It was a marvel of glass and steel, hidden in the hills. But every Sunday, I drove the Bentley to the little house on Maple Street. We rebuilt our relationship slowly. It wasn't perfect. There were scars, but they listened to me now. They respected me. And when Patrick looked at me, he didn't see a girl in a hoodie wasting her life. He saw the woman who had saved his. Mark is currently serving 3 years for fraud. He writes letters asking for money for the commissary. I burn them unopened.